الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. The beginning of September tends to be a time where there's change. Usually this is when schools begin, colleges start up again, and you'll begin to see that same sort of rearrangement that was present, before the summer. And with, in particular, let's say children or kids or even young adults returning back to school, it raises a lot of questions in our mind. What's important for us to understand is that every human being needs attention. And of human beings that need attention, perhaps the age group that needs it the most are children or young adults. And the reason is because it is when we perceive the attention of someone else upon us that we feel loved. And if we don't perceive someone's attention upon us, then we don't feel loved. And human beings, we need love. And in particular, our children need love. Now, how does this tie into our schedules? With schools reopening and colleges opening, etc., there are many other sources of attention that can come to a child. Right? So there's different ways by which they get attention. It can be through the parent, which is in their own home, or it can be through many other avenues. It could be through friends. It could be from a teacher or teachers. It could be from someone online. And if a child doesn't get the attention they need from their parents, then inevitably they're going to look elsewhere for it. And not only are they going to look elsewhere for it, they're going to find it. Now, it's a matter of perception. Notice how I said, if a child doesn't feel that they're being loved, or they're not receiving, they don't feel like they're getting attention, even if the parents have good intentions in mind, they'll look for it elsewhere. Right? And so this is very common in today's society. Where a child, for instance, feels neglected. Sometimes that neglect is extreme, where they're genuinely not taken care of, or they're not taken care of physically or emotionally or psychologically. Sometimes it's a bit milder, where they know that, okay, my parents kind of care about me, but the reality is so-and-so person, or this person down the street, or this girl online, she cares more about me, and I want to attach myself to her or to him, or to this person, to that person, because really that's where I need attention. Now, if you look back at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you'll see how particular he was about conveying his attention onto people. So that the people he was interacting with were the people that he was before, were the people that had the most attention, that he had the most attention on. And that in particular applies to his family. Now generally speaking, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and I may have mentioned this in a khutbah before, but the Prophet ﷺ's characteristic was that when he was with a person, he was fully present with that person. Meaning his full attention was on that person. There's a lengthy hadith that I think Ali radiallahu anhu narrates, and it's a description of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his physical features and his attributes and how he interacted with people. And it's said about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that iltafata ma'a, that when he would meet with someone, he would literally turn his body toward that person so that his full attention, he demonstrated, let me rephrase that, he demonstrated to that individual that my full attention is on you and there is no one that is more important at this moment than you. And this is why many Sahaba felt like they were the most beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. Not because they necessarily were, and we know the maqam of Abu Bakr, but Sahaba felt that they were the most beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. Now, this also this applied to the Prophet ﷺ in general in his interactions with the Sahaba, but in particular it applied to his interactions with his family, where the people within his household were given so much attention that they didn't need to look outside the home in order to find more. One hadith comes to mind, and that's narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha. And she says about the Prophet ﷺ that when his daughter Fatima radiallahu anha, when she was now a bit older in age, she wasn't a child that lived in the home of the Prophet ﷺ, but when she was older, she would come visit the Prophet ﷺ. And when she would come, the Prophet ﷺ would become excited. He'd go to the door, he'd invite her in, he'd kiss her, he'd take her by the hand, and he would seat her down exactly where he was seated, and then he would sit next to her and talk with her. Meaning he wanted to make it clear that when she came to the door, despite her being a daughter, that's now an adult, that now has her own, you can say, family, that look, even at this stage in your life, you are still important to me. And you are deserving of my attention because you are my daughter. You don't need to look elsewhere. I'm here to provide it for you. So he would take her and he would sit her where he was seated, and then he would sit next to her, and then he would interact with her. So the Prophet ﷺ's family himself felt it. So this is something that's very important for us in today's day and age. Because when we're talking about our children, the reality is even if the source of the reality is even if there are other sources of attention that they're going to get, and you may think, okay, well, what's the, I love my child more than so-and-so does. Right? The reality is in today's day and age, if we don't show our love and attention to our children and let them know that they are our priority, and there is no one that's more important to us than them, then they're going to inevitably look elsewhere. And this is why many, many years later you'll hear about, for instance, so-and-so person who just, and to interview people, like, young girls that just disappear with some guy and they travel across the world and they get married and they just disconnect themselves from their families. Sometimes it just happens, but oftentimes when you interview them and you ask them, you'll hear the story that, look, they were looking for attention when they were a young girl in their own house. And their father wasn't providing the attention and love that they were seeking. So what did they do? They looked elsewhere. And they found it elsewhere. Now, we could say, well, that's just stuff. I mean, those relationships don't last. This is just in love and lust. But to a young adult, I mean, they can't understand any differently. So it's important for us to make the individuals within our home a priority, and in particular, as schools begin and people start going back and seeking attention from so many other sources, friends, teachers, colleges, universities, etc., that we still remain their primary source of attention. Meaning our child shouldn't have to look elsewhere in order to feel loved. We should be the ones providing it in the way the Prophet ﷺ provided it for his children. So that there isn't a question of, am I fulfilling, number one, the haqq that child has on me, and number two, so that my child doesn't have to look elsewhere. They should feel loved by me because I give them more attention than anyone else. Now, practically speaking, there's many ways that we learn to do this. The Prophet ﷺ gave us one practical example, many, right? But in particular, that when we are interacting with our children, that we're fully attentive to them. It's not that we're also simultaneously text messaging through other people on some group on our phone, or that we have the TV on and we're listening to them and not really giving attention. Psychologists have studied those sorts of interactions. And they interview children and adults afterward about how they perceive that interaction. And time again, they've proven that those interactions are perceived to be less meaningful than those that are, directly face-to-face. Meaning, let's put it this way, the child can tell when you aren't giving them attention, when they're not a priority. They can tell. It's been proven now. They can tell. This applies generally to our spouses and to our parents, and in general, the presence that we have in all of our interactions with people. But the focus of today's talk of discussion is on how we interact with our children. And some of us have to do a little bit of studying and research into this. Every child is different. Some children, they want to be hugged in order to feel loved. Some don't. Some children, they want to be appreciated by words of appreciation in order to feel loved. Some, it doesn't faze them. Some children, they want a gift every now and then. And this, to them, they perceive this as, I'm feeling loved. In the same way the Prophet ﷺ would treat every Sahabi differently. One Sahabi he would say something positive to, one Sahabi he would scold or reprimand, one Sahabi he would physically pat on the back, and each one of them perceived this as a form of love from the Prophet ﷺ. He was so emotionally intelligent that he knew what everyone needed. Similarly, when it comes to our children as well, children are all different. And what they perceive, so it requires a bit of research on our part, and a bit of study, and a bit of analysis, in understanding our children, and being emotionally intelligent and realizing what are those things that they need in order to feel loved, and let me make it a priority to provide it for them so that they realize that I love them more than anyone else. And so that when they are receiving attention and they're thinking, but I also have this invitation to be loved from this X, Y, and Z person, or from this person, or from this person, or from this Twitter account, or from this Facebook page, I'd rather come back home because that's where I feel the most loved. Right? I'd rather come back home and interact with my parents or spend time with my parents because I know that that's true attention and that's where I'll feel loved. So it's important for us to appreciate that, appreciate it as we begin to see our children age, even when they go off to college, and truthfully, even when they have their own families. Right? Many of us know, if we have children ourselves and we have parents that are older, when we feel the attention of our parents, even if they're 70, 80, 90 years old, it means a lot. It means a lot. This is from the prophetic example. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the tawfiq to give the attention to our children in a way that's most prophetic, in the way that's most in line with the sunnah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow our children to receive love and attention from us more than any other source that they can receive it from. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us united within our homes. سبحان الله وبحمده سبحان الله العظيم أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أرحم أمتي بأمتي أبو بكر وأشدهم في أمر الله عمر وأصدقهم حياء عثمان وأقضاهم علي وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة والحسن والحسين سيدا شباب أهل الجنة وحمزة أسد الله وأسد رسوله. اللهم اغفر للعباس وولده مغفرة ظاهرة وباطنة لا تغادر ذنبا بدوار الله تعالى عليهم أجمعين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم انصر المسلمين في كل مكان. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. عباد الله اتقوا الله واذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله تعالى أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون.